Welcome to Giants Latest. I got this question, which I thought would be interesting. Who should be the starting offensive line this upcoming season? And I think that it should be the exact same as it was last year because this is the first time in probably a decade that the Giants might actually have some continuity at the offensive line position and at the offensive line coaching position because they retain Carmen Brasillo as well as the assistant offensive line coach. So I think it is in everyone's best interest if they do the same offensive line, which going from left tackle to right tackle is Andrew Thomas, John Runyon Jr., John Michael Schmitz at center, then Greg Van Roten, and then Jermaine Illuminor. That was the offensive line that started last year that was doing well enough until Andrew Thomas got injured. So obviously the biggest problem and question mark with this offensive line is what happens if Andrew Thomas goes down again? And I think the only thing that's really different this year about this time last year, and I think that this will continue to change through the draft and as the summer happens, but they actually have two tackles that can be options as a swing tackle to bring in if Andrew Thomas goes down or Jermaine Illuminor. Now, let's all hope and pray that that doesn't happen because as we all know that, when one player goes down, especially someone like Andrew Thomas, one of these swing tackles are not going to be good enough to replace Andrew Thomas. It just is what it is. So ideally, they will be serviceable enough so the offensive line doesn't completely collapse. But I think that starting off the season with the same O-line as last year, we're finally going to have some continuity and you're going to have guys who have now been playing together for a longer amount of time. I just think that overall it's in the best interest of anyone to do that, and that's of everyone. And that's what I expect the Giants to do. So I hope they don't do anything rash, like now that they're finally moving Neal to guard, make him a starter. No. Evan Neal has to work his way up to being a starter, okay? He's got to earn it, especially at the guard. So I think that's what they should do, and I hope that that's what they will end up doing. As we talk about the draft, I want to throw this out there because I know some of you are going to be like, that's completely insane. They would never do that. But hear me out, because I think all of us, maybe 99% of us, thought last year they were going to get a quarterback, right? They went into the season with Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito. Those were three quarterbacks that were on the roster before the draft. And they didn't pick a quarterback in a quarterback class that was better than this year. And I understand they had less draft picks. Okay, last year they had 6, this year they had 8. But they didn't even take a flyer on a Spencer Rattler or a Joe Milton or anyone like that. So this year, I think there's a possibility that they might not draft a quarterback. Now, I think that at this time of year, anything's a possibility, right? I'm not saying it's set in stone. I'm not saying that I'm 100% sure that this is what the Giants are going to do. I'm just saying we have to talk about it because I think there is a possibility that that could happen. And again, based on what they did last year, and then this is my theory for this year and why it's different. But it's not really different because this is the quarterback room. You have two veterans, Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson, and then you have Tommy DeVito that they made a point of re-signing, which look, they can easily cut Tommy DeVito. They can move him to the practice squad, which I think they would. But why would you bring back Tommy DeVito and bring in two veterans if you are either going to pass on Shedeur Sanders or think that he's not going to be there for you at 3? Yes, they can go the Jackson Dart, they can go the Jalen Milroe route, but at what point? Because the reality is they brought in Russell and Jameis to be the 1 and the 2. And if you bring in Jalen Milroe, there is no chance that he is beating out Jameis Winston for the backup quarterback this year. There's just no chance that that happens. So then you're talking about Jalen Milroe, who's projected to go earlier, probably has some better physical tools and things like that than someone like a Will Howard or a Tyler Shock or Kyle McCord, one of these guys who's projected to go later than Milroe. So then at that point, if you're bringing in Will Howard, what's the point? Like I said, if you're bringing in any one of those guys that is not named Shedeur Sanders, they are not playing at all this year. The only reason why they would play is number 1, if they beat out Tommy DeVito for the 3rd string quarterback role, and number 2, Russ Wilson and Jameis Winston go down. Or someone's going to bring a spark and going to help bring some wins in week 12 after your quarterback 1 and your quarterback 2 shit the bed. I just don't see it happening. I don't think there is any world where we see someone like Jalen Milroe play at all this year. So it leads me to believe what is the point? Especially if you are talking about at pick 34, which I don't really think is likely. But let's say you're talking about a mid third round pick. Do you know what other day one starters and better talent that you could probably bring in at that position than someone who's maybe going to be a third string quarterback this year and not even see the field? What is the point? You know? I think if they didn't re-sign Tommy DeVito, which they couldn't have done, there are other teams out there like the Browns and the Titans, two teams right off the bat who have one or two quarterbacks, and that's it. They don't have anyone else. So we have three quarterbacks on the roster. I understand adjustments can be made. I just think I'm going to prepare myself that this year I won't be as surprised as I was last year if they don't take a quarterback. Because you think about it, and next year is going to be their year. If they pass over Sanders at 3, okay, and they don't love Shedeur Sanders, they don't think he's worth the third overall pick, I just don't see them picking a Milroe or a Howard or someone like that. Not when this team still has holes to be filled. Not when this team brought in 2 veteran quarterbacks who are going to be the starter and the backup. Not when all of those things happen. I don't know. I just think it's very much a possibility. You guys tell me what you think. I'm just going to say, wouldn't be surprised if they don't do it. But I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say, but let's move along because I want to focus on the draft too. And, outside of the quarterback position, these are the positions that I think the Giants should focus on in rounds 1 through 3. Now, obviously what happens at 3 is going to dictate what happens later. So we have to go through 2 different options here, right? If at 3 they take Travis Hunter, then obviously I'm not taking a wide receiver at 34 or with the other third round picks. And if they take Abdul Carter, you're not taking an edge at 34 or with those other picks. And honestly, I wouldn't even take an edge in round 7 at that point. Like, the Giants have other holes. That's not really one that I would probably be focused on. So I think in rounds 1 through 3, the top priorities need to be wide receiver, again, not in this order, edge or cornerback, offensive lineman, and defensive lineman. Now, the thing that we know about this draft is that it's very heavy in defensive lineman and edge, which is going to work to the Giants' benefit if they don't get Abdul Carter at 3. So I think they have some benefits there that are working for them. They probably could get a really good defensive lineman at 34 or even in round 3. Then, if they get Hunter at 3, then you can get an edge a little bit later. Defensive lineman, edge, maybe someone who has the capabilities to kind of play in the middle and on the outside, right? Depends on what these guys have to offer. But I think offensive line absolutely needs to be a focus in the first 3 rounds. And I think defensive line, those are the top 2 that need to be the focus. And then depending on what happens at 3, I think you can kind of change that around for edge, cornerback, wide receiver. Now, the Giants have 5 picks from 1 to 105, which is huge. So they can get all of those picks with those 5, which again could make a huge difference within the first few weeks of the season with this team. So I would be interested in seeing them doing that. Those are the positions that I think are worth it. I also think that based on the Giants' history, because they've gone after cornerbacks earlier on in the draft, they have picked round 2, round 3, round 1, Tay Banks. It wouldn't surprise me if they focused on corner somewhat early in this draft, somewhat within those first 105 picks, the 5 picks that they have within the first 3 rounds. So I think it's going to be really interesting, but in my opinion, that's the focus that the Giants should go for. And then in the later rounds, in rounds 4 through 7, day 3 picks, I think that they should go running back, safety, linebacker. Those are the type of picks that I would focus on in those days. They did it last year. They've brought in 2 of the running backs. Eric Ray and Tyrone Tracy were later round picks. They brought in, Tyler Nubin is the only exception to this. He was an earlier round pick, but I do think because they brought in Javon Holland and Tyler Nubin, I do think that they would, if they went for a safety this year, they would go a little bit later than maybe they normally would. And last year in round 6, they brought in Darius Muasau as a linebacker. So it wouldn't surprise me if those are the ones they go for later. Now, especially when it comes to the running back position, obviously, I don't really know what their plan is for Eric Ray. All I know is I better never see him on special teams again, okay? The guy is a running back, and he's a running back only. Now, he was a Shannon Dable draft pick, so it wouldn't surprise me if they don't try and replace him. But I think from a production standpoint, plus knowing that this draft is so running back heavy, I think you got to take a shot on one of them. Maybe it's day 3, maybe it's day 4, but maybe it's day 2, maybe it's day 3, rounds 3, rounds 4. But I would like to see them, I think, take a flyer on a running back and see what happens. I love Turbo Miller. I really want to see more of him this year. Unlike Eric Gray, he can actually play special teams, so we might see him on both sides of the ball that way. And if Eric Gray's not the guy, then let's bring in some talent to replace him. Obviously, Tyrone Tracy has done well. And Devin Singletary, I believe, is on the last year of his deal, so it wouldn't surprise me if he's not here in the future. And they make someone like Tyrone Tracy at that point end up being the veteran. And then they bring in a young guy this year, and maybe they keep Eric Gray. Who knows? But that's what I would like to see the Giants do in the draft this year. You guys let me know what you think about it in the comments. And as always, subscribe for more.